I still remember the first time I picked up a gun in a video game. It was a chunky Nintendo 64 controller, and I was absolutely getting destroyed by my older brother on GoldenEye. He would pick Oddjob faster than me, know every golden gun location, and I could barely aim. But something clicked. Since that day, I've played hundreds of shooters. From the 1v1s in Call of Duty to the side-scrolling chaos of Metal Slug, all the way up to the large-scale battles in Battlefield. First or third person, top-down or side-scroller, I've tried every perspective. And now I'm building my own. But there's a major challenge. In the Ember Guardian, you only move on a single axis. Left or right. No verticality, no platforms to jump onto. Just one dimension. And somehow, the gunplay still has to feel good. Hi, I'm Julian, solo dev at Radbit Games, and welcome to the second episode of this series covering the design of the Ember Guardian, a post-apocalyptic base defense game with strategy, base building, and guns.
I have the guns.
What bloody guns, Tommy?
Today we're diving straight into what makes the Ember Guardian truly unique, its gunplay. Most side-scrolling action games introduce verticality through platforms, allowing the player and the creatures to move along the y-axis. This extra dimension really helps at adding depth to combat, but in the Ember Guardian, movement is almost entirely one-directional. The player is stuck to the ground, unable to jump, and the environment has almost no platforms. Initially, I had planned to add verticality in the level design and in movement, but I revoked this idea and decided to stick with one dimension for two main reasons. Firstly, to keep strategic depth over mobility. At its core, the Ember Guardian is a strategy game. Many key bindings are already assigned to worker management and base building, leaving little room for additional movement mechanics. Secondly, and most importantly, development scope and complexity. Adding platform and vertical movement in the game's core design would have drastically increased development complexity. The player, his loyal dog, the workers, and all the enemies would need to take account of that extra dimension. Walls, climbable surfaces, and jumping mechanics. I'd have to take all of those in account when creating my systems. Originally, I had planned for a 6-month development cycle, but I extended that to 1 year. 7 months into development, the demo is out on Steam. The link is down in the description, by the way. And player feedback has shown I successfully made gunplay engaging thanks to several key variables I'll break down. Firstly, let's talk about enemy types and their behavior. The first creatures I added were crawlers and ghouls, each serving a very different gameplay purpose. Crawlers are the biggest threat to the player. They move quickly, closing the gap in seconds, and their small hitbox makes them hard to hit. They will prioritize your workers over you, so they can strike hard on your economy if you're not very careful when dealing with them. Ghouls, on the other side, are larger, slower, and they have decent health. They form the bulk of the Darkling army, but individually they aren't very dangerous. Instead, they act as ammo sinks, and they also serve as a distraction when the player needs to focus on higher priority targets. At this stage, I had 2 enemy types, and the gunplay was starting to feel interesting. However, I quickly realized creature diversity is one of the biggest drivers to create engaging and varied combat. To keep it fresh, I needed more enemies. The next addition was the Spitter, the game's first ranged enemy. With it, I introduced a high priority target the player just couldn't ignore. This addition significantly changed the flow of combat, as players had to constantly reposition to avoid projectile attacks while dealing with close range threats. At this point, gunplay was better, but still very one-dimensional. Since the player can't move on the y-axis, I needed to force vertical aiming. That's when I gave the crawlers a new ability: jumping. Not only does this push the player to aim upwards and sharpen their shooting skills, but it also makes a big difference visually. When a swarm of crawlers charges at you and some suddenly leap into the air, it instantly adds chaos, urgency, and that perfect feeling of being overwhelmed. But this jump ability wasn't enough to add verticality, which led me to the introduction of the first flying enemy, the Wasp. If you've played the game or watched someone else play it, you probably already hate them. And that's exactly the point. Wasps force the player to adjust their aim dynamically, breaking the linear left or right shooting pattern. This addition made combat feel more dynamic and varied. Moreover, these flying nuisances can also fly over barricades. This addition adds extra tension during night attacks, as some of them can slip past your hunter's vigilance and head straight to the fire. Suddenly, your carefully built defenses don't feel so safe anymore. With With just these 4 enemy types, gunplay already felt much better. Of course, there are and will be many more creatures in the game, each with unique mechanics that continuously renew the combat experience. But I won't spoil them here for you, you'll have to discover them yourself. Now, let's talk about my favorite element to develop on this project: weapons. Since gunplay is at the core of the experience, I needed a wide variety of weapons that each felt unique and satisfying to use. The rifle was a natural choice for the player's starting weapon, a well-rounded firearm suited for various situations. A perfect baseline. As the player progresses, they'll encounter the armorer, an NPC who allows them to upgrade and unlock new weapons. Each gun has its own upgrade tree, shaping the way it plays. On top of that, every weapon comes with a unique secondary ability, sometimes completely changing its use. For example, the shotgun's secondary mode allows to concentrate all remaining shells in the current clip in one devastating blast. This makes it perfect for shredding high health targets in an instant, but be careful as it will drain your ammo just as fast. Weapons are one of the main progression systems in the game, so I won't spoil too much here, but to give you an idea of the depth, I can tweak a ton of variables in my weapons. Fire rate, or cooldown between the shots, knockback and recoil, reload time, spread, range, magazine size and total ammo capacity, we'll come back to that later, movement speed, and swap time between weapons. All these parameters help make every weapon feel different, and the secondary ability makes them feel truly unique. However, I quickly realized this wasn't enough to properly balance the weapons. Take the LMG for example, one of the coolest guns in the game, which is why it's featured in the trailer's opening scene. It has to be and feel powerful, but just making it heavy, slow to handle, and pack a huge recoil wasn't quite enough. It still needed a high ammo capacity and strong damage output to feel satisfying. I had this problem with other weapons, so to balance this, I introduced the special ammo type, which costs twice as much to craft. Now, you can wield absolute firepower, but at a price. With a wide variety of enemies and weapons, the gameplay was starting to feel engaging, but it still wasn't quite there. Since the player's movement is still limited to one single axis, I needed to introduce additional mechanics to offer more strategic options and flexibility in combat. That's where secondary mechanics come into play. Alright, let's address the elephant in the room. The reloading system. The reloading system in the Ember Guardian is controversial. Some people enjoy it, others absolutely hate it, so let me walk you through how it works. When you grab ammo clips from a chest or the crafter, they land in your backpack's ammo pocket. It's temporary storage. You can upgrade it, but like everything in your backpack, it can overflow. And if it does, those precious bullets, yeah, they fall straight into the water. Once you've got clips in your backpack, you can hold the reload key to transfer them in your ammo belt. Each weapon has its own belt, and if you're carrying 2 guns, you get to choose which belt gets the clip. Yes, that means your character is carrying around 2 ammo belts, heavy stuff. Finally, pressing the reload key loads a clip from your ammo belt in your gun. And now you can shoot. Now let's be honest, this system has its pros and cons. At first, it can feel clunky. You keep hitting reload, but nothing happens. That's because you forgot to transfer ammo from your backpack into your belt. And even then, reloading the gun isn't automatic, so you might try to shoot 5 times before realizing, oh yeah right, I never loaded the gun. That can be frustrating. But this also opens up some cool design space. First and foremost, it raises the tension in combat. You have to prep before each fight. And since this system is pretty uncommon in games, you'll probably die a few times because you weren't ready. But when you come back, understanding what went wrong and fixing it, that's a great feeling. And once you've fully mastered it, it opens up interesting choices. If your ammo belt runs dry, you have to think fast. Do you fall back to refill it, taking maybe 1 or 2 hits? Or do you switch to your secondary weapon and keep the pressure on? Since it can take some time to swap weapons depending on which one you're carrying. Are you sure you have enough clips loaded in your secondary weapons belt? This system also creates a strong link to the resource management aspect of the game. Ammo is limited, so sometimes you'll have to choose which belt gets the clip. And of course, managing your storage to avoid overflow. Belt capacity is also a balancing factor. Smaller belts mean less sustained damage, generally higher damage output, and careful planning. And yeah, you can upgrade belt sizes at the armorer, but there will always be differences between weapons. Alright, so as I mentioned earlier, I had initially planned verticality in the levels, so I actually had implemented the player jumping mechanic. I wonder if I can find some gameplay footage of that.
Nope.
But when I abandoned this idea, I soon realized this jump was completely useless. And what's the main other movement mechanic in other games? Dodge rolling, of course. With the classic invincibility delay during a few frames in the roll, this gives a nice new option to tackle encounters. For example, here, as you can see, spitters tend to flee away from the player as he gets close. So combined with ghouls, they were almost unreachable without clearing the ghouls first, except by accepting the fate of taking 1 damage. Now with the dodge roll, the player can decide either to clear the ghouls first, or to roll over them and focus on the spitters. Something that's really important in the Ember Guardian is how combat and resource management are tightly linked. You'll quickly find out your health is actually a resource. You can refill it at your tent and permanently upgrade it back in the hub. In the demo, healing is one of the few uses of small orbs, along with resetting traps. This creates some interesting risk-reward situations, like when you're facing a large group of enemies, it might actually be worth taking damage to grab a chest. And don't worry, dying isn't too punishing. You respawn back at your tent, and your fire loses a few pips, which are actually orbs converted into fuel. So really the actual cost of dying is the time it takes to go back to where you were. This is one of the elements that tie resource management to combat, and in the full game this link will go even deeper. I won't dive into every secondary mechanic as they're part of the game's progression, and I'd rather let you discover them yourself. Just know that there's much more to experience, and the best way to do so is to play the game. As of this video's release, the demo is out on Steam. And if you're like me, to be honest, I don't really play demos. I always prefer waiting for the full game release. I always feel like demos are kind of spoilers. Make sure to wishlist the Ember Guardian using the link in the description. It really helps a ton with visibility on Steam. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to check out the first of this series where we cover the game's visual identity, covering its side-scrolling perspective, modern pixel art, post-apocalyptic cyberpunk dark fantasy universe, and minimalistic UI. I've put a lot of effort into making combat feel strategic, satisfying, and impactful. I can't wait to hear your thoughts, whether it's about the thrill of exploration during the day or the tension of defending your base at night. And trust me, you will want to defend it at all costs, because careful management is the key to survival in the Ember Guardian. Constructing defenses, recruiting and managing your workers, that's exactly what we'll be covering in the next video. See you soon, and until then, keep the flame alive.